Welcome to Better Life Conversations. It's just a joy to be able to spend some time with you today. We're going to be talking about some challenging issues today. We're going to be talking about power dynamics and how to make sure that we are being appropriate as we are engaging with other people, and also how we can set some boundaries so that when other people are treating us a certain way or we see something happening, what are some appropriate ways we can deal with it? So I wanted to thank my friend Cindy for joining us again today. It's a pleasure having you.
It's nice to be down here again.
Yeah. So we've had some really good conversations. I remember, man, it's been, what, a year or so ago?
It's been 1 year.
Yeah. So tell me about what your focus is right now. I know it has to do with power dynamics and whatnot, and how we can protect one another. So let's talk about that.
Well, it kind of culminated with some things in the news that I heard about an evangelical community that was having a huge, what I call abuse of power in the whole structure. And it also went along with some of the studies I'm learning in how our legal system is held together. And it just became this sort of thing. And I thought, well, you know, I could study this in my morning devotions. And by the end, I had accumulated so much. That's when I contacted Jeanette, and they said Jeanette's gone. And then she called me a few days later, and it all worked out. But these, the Christian's response to authority was baffling to me, Charlie, because certainly we're asked to submit to authority. We're asked to pray for our leaders. We're asked to pray for our rulers. And yet, how do we hold them accountable in ways that are good for us as people?
Right.
And good for our families, good for our structures? And then how do we take those concepts and build organizations, build churches, build congregations, build families, build all those things that are based on healthy respect, healthy authority, and not unhealthy authority.
Okay.
And so those were the questions going in. Let me just ask you, what comes to mind when I say Enron, or I say Rwanda, or I say the Holocaust?
Yeah, it's abuse of power. I mean, it's kind of what we're talking about, is where there are people in positions of power that are able to say whatever. A lot of times, I guess I can't distill it down to a couple of words. It's just they get power, people get power, and then use it toward their own ends, rather than the ideal that we have as Christians, where any power that is there should be used toward the benefit of others.
Yeah, and sadly, what happens in my finding was that organizations can become sick, just like people can become sick individually, but organizations can become sick. And there seems to be these fine lines. It was interesting that in the discussion of abuse of power, again and again comes to mind truthfulness. And you can't have a healthy use of power without authenticity and truthfulness.
Well, let's step back for a moment, because I want to make sure that we're all looking at this through the same lens. So let's quickly define, what is abuse of power?
Well, first of all, to have abuse of power, you have to have power. And power is really, in Latin, means to be able to do something. So whether that's you're able to run a church, or whether you're able to run a TV station, or you're able to run your family, it means you're able to do something. And abuse of power is technically defined as someone whose actions in positions of authority exceed their limits and the roles that they were intended to have. So you're exceeding, you're going beyond what you're asked to do. So you are infringing then on people below you, around you, maybe even people above you. But certainly you don't have to have a title to do that. You can have someone infringing, or even being a leader in the room. Sometimes the actual designated leader is not the real leader.
Right.
And to have those dynamics occur. And so as Christians, you know, we are to shy away from anything that is forceful. Within the discussions of abuse of power, the coerciveness comes into play, force comes into play, and violence actually comes into play, as well as deception. The Bible is pretty clear that whenever there's a abuse of power, there's usually untruthfulness happening at the same time. And there's usually a violent takeover of some sort to gain that power, whether that's whole lands or buildings or bank accounts or even just physical violence. But the force has to happen in ways that are less than agreeable to all parties. There's a modern TV station that is in the news recently, and they were actually promising viewers that if they gave $1,000 today, that God would turn their money around to $10,000 in a month. And they actually took a check from a woman that actually was telling their person on the phone who quit and realized she didn't want to be a part of abusive power, but they were telling her that, the announcer said, if I get this money to you today, God will bless it for $10,000 next month. Please take my credit card. And that's when the person on the phone realized, I am part of a corrupt organization that I shouldn't be part of. So that would be an extreme use of power. The same organization is in the news, and they're in litigation now because they had a power takeover, and tapes leaked out of that in a course of about 90 minutes, they had used the word submit 100 times. And the religious community is calling that the worst case of abuse of power they have ever seen, because these texts for submission were being used over and over repeatedly in ways they were never meant to be. And in that case, they were saying, you submit to us because we're in place of God. And those discussions come into being all the time with religious discussions. The idea that someone else is in place of God, someone else has a better channel to God than you or I have. And then we have to defer our mind, our will, our power, our autonomy to that person. But we find it in all levels of society. The iconic school bully, that's a definite example. We also find that I went looking for Bible references, and in the Bible there's a character, I did try to pronounce this right, I'm probably going to butcher it, Diotrephes, and he misused his position, we found in 3 John 1, 9-10. And it was interesting, I did different references, and the New Living Translation says that he loved to be the leader, and he refuses to have anything to do with John. John was trying to go into his congregation, and he was too good for John. Right. And John denounced him as unhospitable. Another English Standard says he liked to put himself first. The Berean Standard says he loves to be first. Berean Literal said the one loving to be first among them. King James said prominence. So he's putting himself ahead of the rest of the congregation. And then I found a biblical example, Hannah. Hannah in the Bible was being bullied by her sister wife, who it says in 1 Samuel 2:7, she was provoking Hannah to the point of not eating and weeping. And that's some serious bullying.
Right, and it was all because she was not able to have children.
But yeah, in that culture, that was saying she was being cursed by God, because the belief was that God had closed her womb, and so she was really saying, you're having God's disdain on you. Right. It's not even just that you can't have children, but you don't have God's approval like I have. And certainly in prosperity doctrines, we see that same thing. Well, you're not being blessed with, yachts like someone else. So we have God's favor,
Right.
You don't.
It's kind of a continuation of, we see examples of that throughout the Bible where, the reason why you're ill or you lost this is because you were bad. You did something wrong. You sinned against God. And Jesus came to reveal that, to expose that, to say, no, that's not what. In fact, I'm going to heal this person. Yes. And not only showing what was broken, but showing what the ideal in a Christ-oriented world, what does this look like? Well, it means helping the needy and doing things for people, not doing it because of what I get out of it, but doing it because that's society and the way Jesus would build it.
Yeah, and you just hit on that. The same psychologist, Diane Langberg, she's spoken for 3 decades in the Christian community, and she used that very example that Jesus told people, this man is not blind because of something he did or his parents did. He's blind to see how the compassionate love of God can be shown to him. And she said, it's never about the bullier, the person that's bullying. It's never about that person. It's about what's going on inside of them, not about the person they're bullying. So in this case, it didn't really have anything to do with Hannah's childlessness. It had to do with her sister wife's hatred and her own abuse of scripture and of what her belief system was. Had nothing to do with the actual situation,
right.
Which is also what they find with bullying. It's more to do with the bully than it is the person they're bullying.
Right.
So we do find that at all different levels. And it is sad because in 1 Samuel 1:6-8 it says, because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. And she literally can't eat, can't sleep. She's in distress. And then we see God, he answers her so honorably by giving her Samuel,
right.
and of course then other children. But his gift to her lives on because Samuel is a man of God and a leader in the kingdom. And so God just richly took that disdain and just turned it around, just like gave Hannah the most beautiful gift he could. And we find God over and over just taking, like he did with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was an outcast, and God said, no, I'm going to your house. We're going somewhere, and took that disdain and just takes the person out of the shame, which is just a wonderful concept.
Right. I think about other stories. I think of situations where maybe somebody's put into a situation and God wants them there. I think about Saul, placed as being the first king of Israel. And there were some warnings along with what that could look like. But again, Saul was a man that God had chosen. But then we see in that story about what happened when he was given power, it didn't stay that way.
Yeah.
I've always struggled with that story a little bit because you also have the future king in many of those stories, David, and the fact that some of these character traits were exposed quite quickly, and yet Saul remained in power and David stayed respectful to that. It's almost, I don't know if counterintuitive is the right word, but those kind of stories worry me because it can send the message that we need to be okay with it because God put them
I'm so glad
in that position.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So here I am on this quest. I'm giving myself my morning devotions to research this topic, and I get to that story. And I felt the same way you did. I felt like, oh no, he says, I will not touch God's anointed. And I thought, oh God, that's what people use for enabling a bad leader. Yeah. They'll say, that's the first thing they'll say, oh, we don't want to touch God's anointed. So I sat there for the first 20 minutes of my devotion, and I was about to cry, and I thought, God, what does this do to my thesis?
Yeah.
And then it hit me. This wasn't, okay, so there's a lot going on. Okay, so we know that Saul is jealous of David because the people are chanting, Saul kills thousands, David kills 10,000.
Right.
It also tells us that Saul is looking at David and he sees a young, handsome guy in full of youth and full of vitality and probably very good looking, all of those things, very capable. And he's thinking, oh, I'm nothing compared to this guy. He resents him. So, David, he's the war hero. He comes back. Comes to the court, he comes to the palace. David's still humble. He's playing the harp, and he gets a javelin thrown at him. I mean, the welcome mat is sort of ripped away. And he's like, oh, yeah, reality check here. I think I should leave, you know. So then he's got Jonathan conveying to him, you know, it's still not safe in the castle, still not safe in the palace. You got to stay away. And then he has this cave scene. He goes to the cave, and David's in the cave, right? And he does these little things, like he'll see Saul sleeping and take the water jug away from him just to kind of taunt him. And then he says, you know, oh, weren't your guards watching you? Well, then Saul arrives at this cave, and we know David can almost touch him. He can almost touch him. And so he reaches out, and whether it's a little pocket knife or something he has, takes that little hem of his garment, just enough to prove he's seen the king. Mm-hmm. He waits till the king and his entourage get out of the cave, and then he says, hey, I've got your garment, you know, I could have taken you. And that's where the piece about the idea that it's God's anointed. And then David goes out of the cave, it tells us, and calls out to Saul, my lord the king. When Saul looks at him, David bows down, prostrates himself to the ground. He says to Saul, why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? Look, I've got your cloak. I didn't harm you. You know, he's beyond reproach. And so then he says, well, this day you have seen with your own eyes that the Lord delivered you in my cave. Some have urged me to kill you, but I spared you. And then in verse 11, we're in 1 Samuel 24 to 31. In 24:11, he says, I took this piece of your robe, I cut off the corner of your robe, but I didn't kill you. And then he says, may the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have to me, but my hand won't touch you. And so we are told that in this portion, David has said to God, I cannot kill him because he's the Lord's anointed. So I thought, okay, we know that people use that word for enabling, but David, I don't think, was using it to enable, not to deal with it. Because David goes back several times and talks with the king. He even says to him repeatedly, why are you treating me like this? Why do you have a problem with me? I'm not killing you. So he's not being quiet about it, but David has a resolve. And this is what I felt like okay, I get it, God. I think this is what you're telling. He was his anointed, not in an enabling way, not saying, oh, we're not going to deal with that committee issue because it's God's anointed, but because he could see that God's plan for the kingdom was bigger, and he could see that God would deal with it, and that it just wasn't the time. And had David jumped in, killed him, conquered, maybe the citizens wouldn't have recognized his authority. Maybe they wouldn't have recognized his leadership. Maybe his kingdom would have been sabotaged, because David was deferring to God and saying, okay, God, we both know this guy's got to go, but I'm deferring to your time frame, to your particular clock, not mine. But David wasn't quiet. David took action again and again. He went directly to Saul again and again. He asked him, he pled with him, and sometimes Saul, in the course of these chapters, even is sympathetic and says, oh, I promise before God, I'll take an oath, I won't hurt you. And Jonathan's still saying, we are still not safe.
Right.
So David is confronting it. He's not going silent, but he is deferring to what God's timetable is.
Right.
Because he recognizes this is an anointing beyond him. This is beyond his own day planner. This is between God's whole plan. So to me, because I get nervous when someone says, oh, don't mess with God's anointed, because sometimes they're corrupt and they're not God's anointed. Yeah. We know that. But in this case, David has talked admitted, gone after the issue, tried to resolve it, but then deferred back to God saying, but God is saying no.
Right. I still struggle with this, Cindy, because I look at current times. I look at when things do happen within our church, within our country, within our family, and there can be that element of people just saying, no, you just have to let it be. You just need to be quiet, maybe because it's not God's time. But maybe there are situations where the abuse continues. So how do we navigate? What tools do we have? I like tools. What tools we have to determine what is the time to stand up? What is the time to stay quiet? How do we know what to do? What is our resource to make those decisions?
Well, I know that like a 12-step group would advocate you give it to God and he does the part you can't, and the serenity prayer, you take what you can and what you can't, you leave to God and you hope to know the difference. Ron, who you met today, was telling me something really interesting, that in the Greek and the Hebrew, there is nothing in the original scriptures that is a term for giving up. Nothing. But there is always terms for giving to God. But it's an active giving to God. It's not like people want us to think of, Charlie, hang up your phone, go to sleep, just don't think about it. It's not that giving up. And it's not a give up. There's no give up term in Hebrew or Greek, or surrender. There's no surrender. But there is a giving to God that's active giving. It's a verb. And you're giving it to him like you would give the car keys to your child, or give the car keys to someone that can take your car in a place you can't take it, or take and give your ticket and fly with a pilot, because you are actively not surrendering, but you're actively, in a verb sense, giving your problem for God to enact a solution.
Yeah, I appreciate, we serve such a generous God who again will show us what the ideal is, but then knows us well enough to know our weaknesses.
Yes.
But doesn't just leave us there. He gives us tools and expectations. This is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to treat other people. But be wise and realize that even people that have gone into situations with the best of intentions can still fall prey to their human nature. So you're going to have, when people have power, you're going to have those that instead of using it to serve others, will use it to serve themselves. Or, as we often see in society, will use ends justify the means. Yeah. So I'll violate these people because of the greater good for this group of people. So what we have here is an opportunity to really recognize and see, what does abuse of power mean, and how can I use it to, that knowledge, to guide myself if I'm the one that has the power, and how, again, can I use it to recognize other people in power and make sure, reflecting on the Bible, reflecting on the principles, the others first principles that the Bible provides, in order to treat people the way God would have us treat them, and to protect people the way God would have us protect them.
The greatest deception is when you think the means justify the ends, or the ends justify the means. That's a huge deception, because there are always going to be reasons. I listened to this podcast, and this lady said that, and she was an attorney, and she said there will always be reasons for not doing the right thing. And she's handled pedophilia cases, and she said the people always had in their minds reasons for not doing the right thing. And it's astounding to her and to those that listened to what she was saying, that some of them in their minds were good reasons. But she said they don't ever justify the means. And a lot of people will equate that kind of deception with almost a narcotic, because the more an organization lulls themselves into that thought process that, okay, we're doing this for this final outcome. We're doing this so that the cause of God is not marred. We're doing this so that the organization can continue. The more that they eat from that deception, the more numb they become and the more corrupt they become. And so it has to be dealt with right away, because there's always going to be those reasons for that. And I wrote down a quote that was really good that she said about that idea, that if you're ever doing things in a deceitful way, you are not doing God's work any longer. And you are not godly any longer. And many of the worst horrific situations in the world have been done by people that have convinced themselves they were doing the right thing.
Right.
And if you're not any longer able to do the right thing in a godly way, she said, you're not godly anymore. And this is how she said: never doing God's work when we pursue a seemingly godly goal by dishonest gains. We are no longer doing godly work, and we are no longer godly. But the self-deception is what people eat from. Tim Keller, a pastor, also said, self-deception is not the worst thing we can do, but it is the means by which we can do the most horrific things.
Well, and part of that seems to be a removal of voices that we might be able to listen to, the Nathans in this world that will come in, that God sends into our lives to reveal where maybe we've gone left instead of right, where we're making those issues. Cindy, I am enjoying this conversation immensely. There's so much good information. So I want to thank you for joining us, and we are going to create a part B to this conversation, because folks, there's so much good information that we can use as we learn to interact with others in a Christ-like way. So we'll see you on a continuing episode next time on Better Life Conversations.